Today, we are here in Lake Como with our favorite mentor of all time.
This is sales training unlike anything else that I've seen on the planet. I have several coaches and several mentors, but something that you can learn right away and then apply it literally within 3 days and get results, it almost sounds too good to be true, but it's not.
All right, guys. So for those of you guys who don't know me, I am Alex's brother. I'm Jackie Ma, and I helped Alex, make over 2 million. What I'm about to share you is going to be a very important concept that's going to help you guys overcome sales pressure, how to not come off salesy, not how to come off desperate, right? That being said, how many of you guys here have ever been worried about coming off salesy or desperate? I see some hands up. When you guys are worried about being like salesy, if you guys ever been sold to and you guys are like, no, I'm good. I'm sure if you guys have done that, you guys have probably been a little worried or a little scared of doing that to your clients. And what that actually is, there's a word for it. It's called sales resistance. How many of you guys have gone a call and was like, I don't want to deal with having to feel salesy, so I'm just going to send them a brochure. I'm going to send them my packages. And if they book, they book. If they don't, they don't. And they're like, I'm going to do this because I don't want to come off salesy, right? If they want me, they want me. If they don't, they don't. And that's cool. You can get bookings that way. But the thing is, there's a big amount of clients that you're missing. That could be the difference from being red and being green. But basically how this works, the relationship between sales pressure and sales resistance is that typically as sales pressure goes up, sales resistance also goes up. Okay. And it's okay to have a little bit of sales resistance. So on 1 to 10, if you're between 1 and say like 5, 1 to 6, that's still fine. You could be at a 6 sales resistance, but still want to move forward, still pay thousands of dollars. Okay. But if you're above a 7, 8, 9, 10, nothing's going to happen. So there's 2 different ways to be able to do this. There's external pressure and internal pressure. Okay. So if I were to explain the difference, external pressure is basically something that happens that you as the business owner, you as like the closer, you're giving them some type of incentive. You're saying, hey, if you guys book now, if you guys book this week, I'll give you guys a discount. I'll give you guys a bonus. If you book now, we'll add this extra thing you said you really wanted. And those are good tools that you want to be able to use, but you also want to be able to read their sales resistance. Right? Because if they have too much sales resistance and you try to apply more sales pressure, external pressure, what's going to happen is that their sales resistance is going to go up and they're going to be like, no, I'm good. Let me think about it. Like, oh no, leave me alone. Right? So what you want to do is you want to be able to learn how to raise sales pressure without raising sales resistance. And how we do that is through internal pressure. It'd be like if, for example, someone went to a gym and a personal trainer approached them. External pressure is like, hey, if you book a session with me this month, I'll give you the first one for free. Or if you book a session with me now, like I'll give you XYZ amount. The trainer is trying to do everything he can to be able to get them to move forward, right? But the more he does it, the more resistance he's going to have. Internal pressure is like the person going in there being like, dude, I haven't been fit since I was in my 20s. Every time I look in the mirror, I feel kind of disgusted with myself. That's like from within for them to want to make a change. How we're able to create this is using the structure that I used to be able to close over $1 million, okay? And if you guys are part of the program, you guys have probably heard this structure before. This is why I really want you guys to use it. And if I were to kind of really explain this in depth, it would take the entire week, the entire month, honestly. You could think about it in 3 parts. So there's the discovery, the offer, the price drop, and the objection handling, okay? So the offer, that's where you really create value. People talk about creating value, but it's like, what is actually creating value? It's like being able to articulate problems and demonstrating to your client that you understand them better than they do, right? And that you have the perfect solution for that. The price drop and the objection handling, what that really does after you do a good discovery, because a lot of people think sales is about being able to do like some objection handling, like jiu-jitsu or something like that. And it's like, that's helpful, right? So you guys can go ahead and think right now about what you guys want, whether that's business related, maybe it's health related, maybe it's, relationship related, right? Maybe you want to be a better husband, you'll be a better father, you want to be a better business owner, you want to get in really good shape. Think about that goal. You guys can have, of course, all 3 of them, right? But think of like the main one, right? And I really want you guys to do this exercise with this. Why this is really important is because like, if you guys can't be able to sell yourselves on what you guys want the most, with the person that you guys know the most, which is yourselves, how do you expect to be able to sell a stranger that only kind of wants what you do? Ideally, you want to make this very conversational, not like you're reading off a list of questions like you're interviewing someone. What we're going to want to do is start off with the discovery. So here, what I want you guys to ask yourselves is like, what do you desire, right? Like, what is it that you guys want? like be very specific both on the emotional side, on the logical side, like the number and the emotional side behind it. When I say this, what I mean is like if you guys have a business goal in mind, think about where you want your business to be. What number does that look like? You know, why is that number important? If it's like a fitness goal, it's like, well, how much do you want to weigh? Right? Why? What's special about that weight? It's because everyone has these desires. Everyone has these pains. Everyone has these like, you know, like what Jake's thing said, we're all dreamers, right? And it's like, we all have these things that we want, but it's all very vague. It's all just like up there in the back of our heads, and it's something that we're going to eventually get to. You know, when you're working with your couples, when you're working with your clients, they have an idea of what they want, right? That's why they're on the phone with you. That's why they're on the call with you. But they're struggling to be able to articulate it. Help them, right? You're supposed to be the expert. You're supposed to be the leader. What a lot of people do is that people that don't know that, they'll just be like, oh, they're a bad lead. I'm going to go ahead and toss them away because they don't know what they want. Well, it's like, no, dude, they just haven't articulated yet, right? So help them articulate it. And if you do that, they're going to be more invested. They're going to value what you do more. So does everyone have like their goal kind of written down, kind of noted? Anyone want to share?
Yeah, mine is to be able for my wife to not have to work, and for myself, I want to be in better shape than I was in high school.
Okay, why is that important for you to, you know, be there for your wife?
Because growing up, I didn't have much, you know, and my parents had to continue to work, and I want to be able to, you know, I wear my heart on my sleeve, so I want to be able to give back. I'm a person I want to always give, and I don't really care much for me. It's just like I like seeing other people happy back there.
Okay, awesome, Mark. Thank you for sharing. So if I were to ask a follow-up question on that, like, what does that really look like? You know, how many hours a week does that look like that you're spending with them?
Be able to just like wake up and like not have to worry about like things I have to do.
Yeah.
You know, we can travel. And I love to travel. My wife loves to travel, so I want to be going on more family vacations, and it's like, you know, where we could just pick up and go.
Based off of that vision right now, man, like how much would you need to make with your business, or, you know, with just in general, to be able to make something like that happen?
My goal is right now, because I've never made like 100,000, so that's my goal.
I guess what's kind of in the way?
I think is my doubt, because like nobody's done it, or I don't know what that looks like. Like, you know, I've been in sales and doing that stuff, but I wasn't passionate about it. Yeah. So this is something I've always been passionate about. So I'm like, okay, so I can take what I'm passionate about and apply it. Learning how to do that, to be able to do that. Because to me, it seems like far-fetched, and I'm hearing all these like great stories of, oh, I made this. I mean,
yeah, all these people crushing it, right? Like in this room.
But at first, I felt discouraging because I'm like, you know, they doing it. So put my pride aside and just have a fresh heart. You know what I mean? And what can I absorb from everybody?
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Mark. Like what I did with Mark right now, he had the vision, right? But like I mentioned earlier, you want it to be very clear and very certain, right? So that's why having numbers to it makes a lot of sense. You know, if I were to ask Mark about like the weight, the fitness aspects, like I would probably ask him more like, what does that look like? You know, what number does, you know, your ideal vision kind of look like? So you guys understand like the goal part, right? So what we did there is like the goal section and then also probing, because we don't want surface level answers. We want like the legit stuff, the real stuff, the thing that makes it valuable and certain and like clear, right? Because anyone can give a vague answer, and vague answers it's complete opposite of being certain or clear, right? So if you guys are talking to your clients and they give vague answers and you just let that slide, you're doing them a disservice because you're not giving them certainty, right? You're not helping them be able to articulate what they need to articulate. Let's move on to the next one, and this is going to be like the pain section. So there's going to be 8 of these that I'm going to be going through for the discovery section. All 8 are really important, but then also to be able to prevent objections that you would normally get. So for the pain section, for whatever you guys are thinking about, right, whether it's your relationship, your health, your business, what sucks about it, right? Because if you guys had it, obviously, like it wouldn't be a problem. So if it's something that you guys want, there's a gap. You know, self-reflection is important, because if you don't know where you're at, you can't go to where you need to be. It's not supposed to feel like I'm being attacked by questions and really be like sitting in my therapist chair or something, like, you know, getting interviewed. In actual practice, when you're talking to a lead, this should feel very conversational. Okay, it's supposed to flow. It's supposed to seem very conversational and not like you're reading off a list of questions. The next thing is cost of inaction, right? This section is really important in the discovery, because you can know what you want. You can know why it sucks. You can know why you haven't been there yet. But people are very good at pushing things away. So waiting till next Monday, right? Waiting till next month, waiting till next year. So what we want to do is be able to find out why it's important for it to happen now. How many of you guys have heard like, oh, I got to think about it? Yeah? Raise your hands. Yep. Okay. So this question is going to be really important, Because if you don't, you're going to get a lot more of that, even if you do everything else right. For you guys right now, like if you guys are thinking about your relationships or your business or your health, like why is it important for you guys to do that now? Like how long has it been going on for? Has it been going on for a few months, a few years, right? What would happen if the next couple months, the next couple of years, the next couple of weeks look like the past couple of weeks, right? If literally nothing changed, what would happen? Right? Would you still be in that pain? Would you still like have that relationship, still have that level of fitness, still have that, like business that isn't quite where you want it? These are kind of difficult questions to ask, but they're important to ask because like the real answers you get are very powerful. It creates that internal pressure, right? It turns on the water hose more. So the next one is basically solutions, right? What have you tried before? What was cool about it? What sucked about it? Okay. You guys got that? That one should be relatively simple. So the next one is going to be support, right? So what I mean by this is that like how many people here want to do something, but then they're like, hey, you know what? Like I got to check in with my significant other first. Do they have to be on the same page in order for this to actually happen? But does that part make sense? Why it's important to be able to address who else is part of the decision, to be able to address who else is part of like the process? Someone that really wants to work with you, they could love you, they could love exactly what you do, but if the person that's like spending a bunch of time with them, they're not on board, what's going to happen? They're going to fall off, right? Or their stuff isn't going to really like go through. So it's really important to get them on the same page. Then the last one's kind of like investment. It's both accessibility and willingness. Do you have the time? Do you have the money to be able to like make this happen actually? And if you do, are you willing to be able to spend that? But it's important to understand if it's like a conditional constraint, like literally you don't have the time, you don't have the resources, or if it's like a willingness constraint, right? It's like, I'm not willing to spend the time, I'm not willing to spend the money. When someone says like, hey, it's too much. Well, is it too much because of the condition? Like you literally can't, like, or you're just not willing to be able to do it. And how you answer that is actually two very different ways. To answer a willingness objection and be able to answer a like conditional objection. And this is the type of conversation you could have with someone that marketing can't, that branding can't. Those are, of course, very important because those are important for trust. But, if you have a baseline of trust, this is relational, right? This is like human psychology. It's like understanding people, understand what their problems are and understand what they actually care about. Because when you do understand what they care about and what their actual problems are, it makes it so much easier to like create an offer that is catered to what they want. Right? And that's how we create value. Too many people rely on marketing, they rely on the branding, they rely on their videos to just create that baseline of value, and they get lazy to be able, they either get lazy or they just don't know how to be able to raise the values on a personal level. All right, so that's why it's really important to do both. If you have no branding, if you have no social proof, anything like that, you have no videos to show, your baseline value is very low. All right, so you could only charge so much. So you want to be able to learn how to, like, in addition to having a strong baseline of value, be able to raise up the value. So then whether you're charging here or here or here, it's still a no-brainer and people want to move forward if they have the willingness and condition to be able to do that. What we want to do is be able to create value, right? And how we create value is by solving problems. That's really what it boils down to when it comes to business. So that's why it's really important to understand what problems your prospects have. That's why we do the discovery, to be able to understand the problems that they have and what they need. This structure of how I'm going to teach you guys how to create an offer is going to be something that is going to really be able to tee up value. We want to make the offer as catered as possible. What I want you guys to do is not to list a bunch of features. What you don't want to do is be like, hey, this bike right here has handlebars and it has baskets and it has a bell and it has seats and it has a cool little light with cool tires. Do you guys want that? But a lot of filmmakers, they approach their brochures, they approach their pricing the same way. It's like, hey, you guys want 2 videographers, whatever that means, in 6 hours, which might be enough. Most of your couples, unless they're very well educated, they're going to see that. And what ends up happening is that they don't understand how that connects to solving the problem. Right, so you have to be able to articulate what those features actually do to be able and how it relates back to the problem. So let's say, for example, like having really good audio. What someone might say is like, yeah, we're going to have a bunch of mics for you guys. It's going to be great. So, right, why is that important? Maybe if you were to instead tie it into, because earlier they mentioned how someone really, they were a bridesmaid at like another party, right, another wedding. And they gave this amazing speech. Everyone gave them a standing ovation. But no one recorded it. This amazing speech she gave was prepared, months for, just gone with the day, right? Someone had that type of experience. They're like, hey, well, you know what? At my wedding, it's going to be really important, not just, to have mics, but you're going to have this amazing audio setup that's not going to be able to like just capture the speeches, but it's going to allow to be able to make really amazing storytelling, right? Because I'm not sure if you know this, but the audio, that's what really makes the films that you really like that you mentioned that you told me that you liked, that's what makes it special. Does that make sense? Right? So that's a very, very, very basic example about turning like a feature into something that's relevant to a pain or desire. Okay. How I want you guys to be able to create value is by having a really good offer. And I want you guys to be able to do this by not listing out features, but instead doing something called pillars. So I want you guys to be able to use pillars to be able to sell your stuff as opposed to just listing off features. Because when you list off features, what ends up happening is that the person you're talking to, they don't connect with what they're just saying. And the baseline of value of just whatever they came in with is just that. And you leave a lot of money on the table because people who otherwise would have been able to have been willing to spend money, if you raise the value, if you connected the dots for them, they wouldn't book, right? And you lose out on clients that could have been amazing, that could have been networking opportunities, stuff like that, okay? So what we want to do instead are be able to articulate pillars in a format that allows you to be able to speak directly to their pain points, be able to speak directly to like what they care about and like language they can understand. So then that way they could really raise up the value and be able to, want to move forward with you and ultimately be able to build that relationship and book with you. What a pillar actually is, if you guys were to break it down, kind of looks like this. It starts off basically by thinking of what everyone else does. So if you guys are filmmakers, you guys could be thinking about your competition, right? Well, what do they do that kind of sucks that I could do better, right? Why does it suck? So if I were to really articulate what this looks like or what this sounds like, is to do what everyone else does, why it's bad, and then do something called a problem chain. So why what's bad is really bad, and then introduce what you do as a solution, right? So by doing that, by doing a problem chain before introducing your pillar, you really tee up the value of your thing because you're articulating the problem for your client, right? Like what I mentioned earlier, value is being able to solve problems. And if you're able to articulate their problems better than they can, they're going to be like, wow, this person knows exactly what I'm going through and they understand it better than me, right? They're an authority on stuff that I didn't even know, right? So if you're able to have that type of experience for them, they're like, wow, that is exactly how I feel. That's exactly what I've done. Then they're going to be very receptive to what your solution is. So the reason why we want to separate ourselves from what they've tried in the past is more so than competition, more of like what they associate with negative emotion, right? Because you don't want to lump yourself into something they've tried that didn't work, right? So that's why we ask the solution question in the discovery, because if they've tried, let's say, intuitive eating, or they've tried meal plans, right, and it didn't work, you want to be careful about how you phrase your pillar. So for a lot of people, for like your brides, a lot of that's going to be very similar amongst your clients, right? But some of your leads are going to give you like specific extra things that they've tried that you want to be like, hey, remember when you said you tried that? Yeah, like that kind of sucks because of this. If I were to say something like, hey, so what most filmmakers do is they'll come ahead and, they'll charge by the hour. And that's cool. But what ends up happening is that that's enough time to be able to get the highlights of the day. But the problem with that is that it forces you to be able to compromise on what moments you want captured, right? And you feel rushed on kind of the most important day of your life. So what we do instead is something called, unlimited coverage. So this allows you to be able to relax into your wedding day, right? Or, whatever they mentioned in Discovery. What a lot of filmmakers will do is like, hey, you want extra hours? We want to do 10 hours instead of 6. Couples, like unless they're also like filmmakers, they don't know the difference between 6 and 10 hours. They're just numbers in their heads, all right? They're like, well, 10 is almost double 6. That must be good. But if you're able to articulate like actual problems to what 6 hours look like and what 10 hours looks like, then they're going to be able to see more value because you're articulating the problem more than they even understand. And by doing that, they see you as an authority, plus they associate more value with extra hours. Can you guys see why that's like a little bit stronger than just saying like, hey, we'll do an extra 4 hours for like however many $100? For the pillar structure, who wants to be able to do it like for their own goals, right? So they could be health, it could be relationships, it could be business, right? I see there's like 3 hands up. Who wants to? You guys decide amongst yourselves. Who wants to?
A lot of people tend to do when they want to lose weight quickly is they'll do like an intermittent fasting, and that can work for some people really great. But what else ends up happening is that they will oftentimes rebound and end up breaking with bad food, and ultimately they don't end up losing any weight. So what we do instead is the slow and steady, easy weight loss. And then that way you're for sure to start losing at least a little bit of weight, and you're more likely to keep it off long term without doing the rubber band dieting, losing and gaining and losing and gaining. Was that Like a pillar you're aiming for?
Does that make sense, guys? Are pillars pretty clear, guys? Or yeah? Okay. So that's going to be important because like whenever you guys frame something, you want to build more value, think about the pillar structure. Okay. And whenever you try to do something, whether you're talking to your significant other, your family member, or your leads, this is going to help connect, help make it hit. Okay. So you don't have to have one pillar. You could have 3, you could have 4, you could have 5, right? Probably not more than 5. That's a little too much. But you could use pillars to be able to like make stuff stick, right? You would do that, 2, 3 times, maybe 4 or 5 times, depending on what your offer is, right? But then after this is going to be a really important part that a lot of people kind of miss. So this is going to be something called the temp check. Basically, the temp check is going to be something that you are gauging how on board they are with this. Like, how much do they actually like it? So there are kind of like, finessey ways to be able to ask this, right? But the core of it is like, hey, 1 to 10, how much do I like the process? If someone's 8 out of 10 on board, or 7 or a 5 or a 6 out of 10 on board, like there's a misconnect. There's not value there. Honestly, if it's less than like a 9 or a 10, you should be asking your leads, why it's not an 8 or a 9 or a 10, and add that to your offer. At this point, there is very little sales resistance. So it's very easy to add more value and change the offer before you do the price drop. Because once there's a price drop, you raise sales resistance. And when you raise sales resistance, everything is harder to do. To be able to change their mindsets, to be able to add more stuff, to change the value, it's a lot harder because they're more resistant to hearing you. So you want to be able to identify what the gap in the value is and be able to raise that first, change the necessary mindsets before raising sales resistance. Because every time you talk about money, every time you price drop, there's sales resistance. Does that make sense? Why it's important to fix the offer before you guys move forward? So what a lot of people will do when they're doing sales calls is that they'll kind of give a mediocre offer or something that doesn't connect or resonate. They won't do the temp check, or they're just like, whatever. And they'll just keep going anyways. And they're like, oh, it didn't close and Jackie's sales process doesn't work. And it's like, well, dude, you didn't do a temp check, right? You didn't fix things, actually customize stuff like while resistance was still low. And once you guys do that and it's like a 9 or 10, then you guys are ready for this next step. Okay, so this next part is going to be the price drop and the objection handling. If the discovery was true and it's coming from a real place and you created a lot of certainty, you created a lot of articulation, and you gave an offer, a game plan that solves their problems like a 9 or a 10, then at this point, if they're at a 9 or a 10 and they're able to do it, then it's really just a matter of helping them stay accountable to what they want. So for a lot of people, this is uncomfortable. So they're like, all right, bye. I'll send you an email. You can let me know back later. And they get ghosted, right? Or they hear back and they're like, thank you so much. We're good. There's 4 objections, right? There's value. This problem being solved is worth more than the investment. Value's there. Timing, like I mentioned earlier, that's I'm going to do it later. I see the value. I'm down to do the investment, but I'm going to do it next month. There's that, and then there's the support, right? It's I'm down to do this, but my significant other. Well, how am I going to be able to problem solve, to be able to talk to them, communicate to them, to cut them off, to be able to make this happen? And then if all those things are figured out, at that point, it's I'm willing to do this, but logistically, how am I going to be able to do this? That's where you have to get creative to be able to do that. So obviously, a lot of that's a lot of work, right? And that's why a lot of people shy away. Thoughts, questions, feelings.
How did you come up with this system, and how did you apply and what made it stick to be okay, this is successful. That's helped me be successful and Alex be successful as he is.
This super special structure that I used to close over $1 million is not something I came up with. So I learned this from mentors, right? People that were smarter than me, that have done this before, that have taken their years of experience and I learned from them, right? So I'm resharing that with you guys in a slightly different way.
Well, what was it that
Dude, just closing a bunch of people, and also not closing a bunch of people, right? Because it sucks when people are they give you, how many of you guys have heard I got to think about it, right? How many people have heard, oh, it's too expensive? How many people have heard oh, I'll decide later in a month, right? Oh, how many people have heard let me talk to my husband, let me talk to my wife, right? When you get that enough, you want to figure out why, right? So when I really understood that and I really did that structure correctly, I got a whole lot less of those, right? And when I did, I know how to keep them accountable. I know how to help them be able to overcome that, right? To overcome the fear, the logistics, the inertia. Because I built up enough value, they were willing to, they didn't see me as a butting heads with them. Like this salesperson's like, yeah, let's do it, right? I was like literally like, dude, we kind of came through this path together. We're on the same page. Like, let me help you do this. And if you approach sales in that way, there's like very little resistance. Yeah, the more people I got like doing something called objectionless closes, where they're just like, yeah, that's awesome. Let's just do it. To be able to have a close where there is no objections because you did all that correctly, you built up enough value, and it was like a no-brainer for them because they saw you as someone that was like, not necessarily a friend, but someone that was like helping them articulate their problems, and they saw like your game plan as a solution to do that. And that's really cool for you too, because then you don't have to feel like it's this like battle of like, I'm gonna sell you. And they're like, no, I'm not. And I'm not gonna be sold to, right? If you approach it that way, it doesn't come off salesy, and people thank you after they give you money, right? And they could not just be like, oh man, I just spent this much amount of money, but they're like, no, I just got this much value. It's a very cool feeling. And the more times I got those feelings, the more time I was like, yeah, I want to do more of that, right? And the times where I was like, dude, this sucks, I reviewed what sucked, and I was like, what's going on? What's the problem? What do I got to do different to be able to fix this? And I implemented the feedback, right? Like, how many of you, like the very first time you guys picked up a camera, your footage looked like Alexander Moss? So basically what I'm saying is that like, the first time that you picked up a camera, you probably sucked, right? First time you tried editing something, you probably sucked. Did it take you 5 times or 10 times or 100 times before you got good? That's kind of a trick question because it's less about like how many reps that you're doing and more about what you're doing in between the reps. Like I was telling Mark right now is that you could do 100 sales calls and it could all suck. And that it's not a good feeling. You're like, dude, I just wasted hours of my life. So how to kind of flip that on its head is to understand that to execute better, for filmmaking, for editing, for sales calls, execution is not like this switch that is on and off. Execution is like a dial, right? It's like on a scale, on a spectrum. So you could be like the varsity basketball player that knows the strategies, that's watched YouTube, but there's also the college level and the NBA level players that are doing the same strategies, but executed way better, right? And as a result, they're able to get paid, millions of dollars versus other people, they have to pay money to be able to join a league. It's not like you're executing or not, it's about like how well are you executing. So ideally, you want to be further on the spectrum of like execution. So what that means then, the question you should be asking yourselves is like, well, how do I execute better? And what I found is like not just doing a lot of reps, but also getting feedback in between. And why that's really important, right, is like if you take a camera and you're shooting something every day for a year, sounds like a cool way to be able to get better at filmmaking. But if you actually never look at your shots and you don't get critiqued on them, or you don't be able to like see what was good, what was bad, you're probably not going to be that much better a year later. So it's kind of the same thing with sales or any process really. To get better at the execution, you don't want to just do a whole bunch of reps. You also want to be able to like self-assess, or if you don't have the knowledge to yet, to have someone else be able to help assess what could be better and what was good, what was bad. Because if you do that, then every time you get a loss, it doesn't have to be a loss. It could turn into a learning lesson. Because imagine if like every 3 sales calls you did, you submitted one of them and you understood why that was a total tank. Then what ends up happening is you get excited. You're like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. That makes so much more sense now. Let me go ahead and try that on my next call. So instead of it being like discouraging, if you get feedback, it turns into excitement. It turns into growth. Because that is how you grow, right? You do a bunch of stuff that sucks. You go outside your comfort zone and you stretch the limits of your comfort zone by going further out. If you only do what you're comfortable with, you're gonna stay in your comfort zone. So if you're only comfortable with sending out PDFs, pricing guides, how do you expect to get better at sales, right? Or sales calls?
I kind of get that. And I was kind of thinking that might be what you said. I guess maybe it's also kind of a scary thing because say you only get like a set number of, let's just say you get 10 inquiries in a month, right? And your normal booking rate, we'll just say is 50%. So now you're booking 5 a month. That's great. If you want to go try a new sales method, you might go to 0 or you might go to 1 until you really hone your skill. And in that time where as the time goes by, if you are struggling, it's like, wow, I just burned 1 month, I'd burn another month, I guess it's going to be a little scary thing. So I'm just trying to figure out the best method to.
50% closing rate is really good. But the thing is with like very high closing rates, it's very easy to manipulate. So if you're only closing the warmest of people, if you're only getting on calls with the warmest of people that already know your prices, that already came on knowing they want to book with you, it's like, yeah, no, duh. They're going to book with you. Because they didn't come on the call to be able to get sold to be able to have the problems articulated. They came on there to be like, I'm ready to pay you. And I see why it's scary, but the thing is, if you're kind of doing that model right now, well, like quite realistically, what's going to happen is that those people are going to book with you anyways. If those clients were going to book with you, like through a pricing guide, if you do a call with them and you do this process with them and like you build more value, they're going to just be more excited to book with you. And what we teach is a price drop at the highest point that you want to sell to. But if they can't afford that, or if the value isn't high enough, you could always downsell and be like, hey, you know what? If that's like a little bit too much for you, I don't want you to be able to spend your entire wedding budget on my highest package, right? At the same time, I don't think the best idea is for you to have your aunt's iPhone just like on a tripod. So what I think could be a really good idea is if instead we go with our base package. And this way we're still able to give you that cinematic feel that you love, give you that Netflix homepage that you love, and still be there for your entire wedding and do exactly what you're telling me you wanted.
So an add-on to that, you were talking about if they say, oh, that's a little bit too much for me, and then go down. But sometimes, and actually a lot of times, they don't tell you that on the call. They say, oh, I'll think about it. Or, oh, I'll talk to my fiance and I'll get back to you. And then they just don't get back to you, and then they kind of ghost you, and you try to send them a message, and then they ghost you and that kind of stuff. How do you deal with that?
So if you're going to spend 15, 20 minutes on the price, on the discovery, 15 minutes on the price drop, on the offer, you're not going to just be like, hey, dude, that's too much. And then you're just like, spend 2 minutes and then like, okay, bye. You wouldn't just be like, okay, well, there's some resistance, so I'm just going to give up. You're not going to give up on your clients as soon as they have some form of resistance. This is the uncomfortable part, right? Is when they say like, oh, I got to think about it, right? Or I got to talk to my husband, or I got to talk to my fiance. Okay, yeah, that's perfectly fine. I guess like as you're thinking about it, what exactly will you be thinking about? And they'll be like, oh, just like if it's worth it, whatever else. Oh, if it's worth it? What do you mean? Well, this is kind of expensive, right? Like it's kind of above our budget. Okay, I see. Money aside though, is this actually like the package you want? Or is there something missing, or what's going on? No, the package is perfect. Just like, I really don't think we should be spending that much on video, right? Just because we, are kind of tight on money right now. Okay, I still really value this, but I don't know if this is makes the most sense for us. I really want to do this, but I don't know if we can. Okay, so at this point, it's really just the finances that's holding you back, or is there like anything else? No, it's really just the finances. Or they'll be like, actually, I'd want, I don't think I need 10 hours. That might be too much. Okay, got it. Anything else that's like you're thinking about? Like you're asking them, right? Like if they just don't want to do it, it's like, well, why, right? So, of course, you don't want to say why, but like you do something called the closing circle that I teach in the objection handling section.
So you definitely recommend getting a call every question rather than just saying something.
Well, I would say like a pricing guide can be helpful, right? But it depends on where you're at with your business, If you're trying to get better at a skill, but you want to get more reps in, right? So it makes sense to be able to get on calls with as many people as you want. If you're pretty good at the skill, you have a lot of leads, and you kind of want to disqualify people because you're working too much, you might want to be able to send a starting price. Or say, for example, you're like, dude, I only want to do people that would minimum pay me $12,000, and I'm going to send them a pricing guide. If they book, they book. I don't care if they do. But if you do actually care if they book, like, yeah, get them on a call. But if you don't, then do the minimum effort and just like send them a pricing guide. If you take it with the frame that I'm practicing the process and I don't care if they book or not, I just care if I get better. I just care if I'm implementing and getting feedback and implementing again, then having more calls is great. And if they're unqualified, that's kind of even better because it's even lower pressure, right? So if you mess up, well, dude, they weren't going to book with you anyways because they only had like $300. So like, doesn't matter, but I got a chance to practice. But if you feel like you have enough practice, or you're just kind of like really wanting to avoid having a whole bunch of leads that are unqualified, then you could do a starting price, like starting price of $3,000, $4,000, $8,000, whatever else. And if they feel like that's within the range, they'll book with you. They'll book a call with you. If not, then they'll weed those people out, right? But at the same time, like Hannah mentioned on her, talk earlier, she turned someone that was $1,500 to a 5K booking. And how she did that was being able to articulate what the bride wanted and then be able to also be like, I have the solution to your problem. And now they see a lot more value. So they're like, hey, a generic videographer I was thinking would be $1,500, but now that you solve this very specific problem, it's worth a lot more to me. And that's why they're willing to spend 5K instead of $1,500. But you can't, like, stuff like that, you can't do on a pricing guide, right? At the same time, like, I wouldn't want people to like over disqualify at first because it's important to get the reps in. So then if you only have 10 calls and those are the 10 qualified calls and you're not getting anyone else on the call, maybe you're overqualifying.
More than often, I'm finding they do have to spend at least a day or two, make that booking. Very rarely, if at all, I've had a bride book on the call. Does that make sense?
So that's a mix of a few things. I think just in the wedding industry, that's just not super common to do. One reason that you might not be getting like same day closes is because you're not asking for it on the same day. But why that's important to be able to do this, or like the utility of being able to do that, even if you don't mind if they book like a day or two later, is what that will do, especially if you have both decision makers on the call, is it'll bring out the real objections. And if it's within your budget, then they're either going to be like, yeah, let's do it. Or they're going to be like, well, actually, da 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 da. And then you objection handle, right? And it's so much easier to objection handle on the call than it is trying to do that over DMs. But also why that's important is because that also allows you to find out what the real objections are. By doing that, you're able to uncover stuff that they were hiding, right? Because if there were no objections, it just makes sense for them to do it that day. Asking for the sale will bring the objections out on the call, right? So they're not hiding it from you. Does that make sense? Cool. Does that answer your question? Does that help? Awesome. All right.